So what he does is he puts a committee together called the Committee on Public Information. He's got two purposes for putting this committee together. One, to raise money for the war, and two, to create an anti-German attitude, boost morale, get us all on the same page. And the man that Wilson chooses to lead the Committee on Public Information is George Creel. So again, Wilson needs to raise money for the war effort. He's got to create good morale and an anti-German attitude. Therefore, he forms the Committee on Public Information and appoints George Creel to head that committee. So my question to you would be this, Aisha: how is he going to raise money for the war effort? No. Well, maybe a little. He's going to
what is that called? Bonds, yeah.
Sell war bonds or liberty bonds. Here's one here. This is from World War II. This was issued on November 1945, never been cashed. 55, 65, 75, 85, 95, 2005, 2015, 70 years old. I found this and I thought, what that's worth with all the interest over that 70 years. Well, I took it into Gil McKendry, and he said, well, that's a series, what was the series on this? This is a Series E, I think? Yeah, Series E bond, which means the only person that can cash this in is the one it's written to here. Holston Bond from Newport News, Virginia. If he was alive or any of his heirs were alive, they probably could cash this thing in. I don't know what it'd be worth, but it might accumulate some pretty good interest. But what someone would do, and I don't know the exact figures, is they would go out and buy a Liberty bond or war bond for, $20. And then at the end of the war, what would they get in return? $25. So they bought a $25 war bond for probably $20 and would make an additional $5 when the war was over, for basically lending your money to who? The government. So people use this as an investment. Okay? So Liberty bonds. To create the anti-German attitude, all public schools across the country banned the teaching of German. Schools could not teach German any longer. And I will tell you, I don't know every school in Wyoming, but I don't think there's very many that teach German now because of the emphasis on Spanish. But I knew when Mr. Tonkovich retired that we'd never have any more German, because German teachers just aren't out there because nobody teaches German. But in those days, that was as popular as teaching Spanish today, probably more popular. Okay? Sometimes we like to learn the language of our enemies. Okay? But they banned it. No more teaching of German. Any of you know what sauerkraut is? Let me spell it for you. Sauerkraut is S-A-U-E-R-K-R-A-U-T. What is sauerkraut? Yeah, fermented cabbage. Anybody here like it? I kind of like it. Put it on Polish dogs, different things. A lot of people don't like it. What? Rubens, yeah. Sauerkraut. Well, anyway, we couldn't call it sauerkraut anymore because we're not going to help those Germans anyway, so they referred to sauerkraut as liberty cabbage. Liberty cabbage. Now, what was a not very nice name for a German soldier in World War I and World War II? Called him Kraut. Called him a Kraut. That was kind of a negative name, okay? Now, another thing, I don't know if you've had them or not. Anybody in here had German measles? They're pretty popular in my day. But you could no longer refer to German measles as German measles. They were referred to as Liberty measles. And it seems kind of silly, but that's the way it was in those days. So, the three examples of an anti-German attitude was banning the teaching of German language in public schools. Americans began to refer to sauerkraut as liberty cabbage, and German measles were called Liberty measles. Okay? All right, that's going to take us then to the United States and the Great War. World now becomes World War I because we've got the world involved, not just Europe. The United States and the Great War, that's what they called it as well, World War I. Now, let me ask you about Great Britain in particular. Since German submarines weren't letting anybody in or out, what were the people doing in Great Britain? Weren't getting any supplies or anything in or out. What? They were starving to death. Matter of fact, by 1917, well, let me rephrase that. By April of 1917, there was only enough food in Great Britain to feed its population for 3 more weeks. The German submarines, by April of 1917, had sank almost 1 million tons of shipping that was either coming into or leaving Great Britain. By April of 1917, German U-boats had sunk nearly 1 million tons of supplies and food, etc., that were either going into Britain or coming out of Britain as trade. And by that point in the war of April of 1917, Great Britain only had enough food to feed its population for 3 weeks. So who's got to bring them food? The United States of America. And what are they facing if they do that now that they're in the war? Being attacked. So a naval admiral by the name of William Sims came up with this ingenious plan to bring food and supplies to Great Britain in American ships by using convoys. Which means what? What's a convoy? You guys went to state basketball tournament, you might have went up in convoys. What does that mean? Groups, okay? Now, that's fine and dandy. You can send all these merchant ships over to send supplies and food to Britain, but they're still vulnerable, so what do you surround them with? Battleships, yeah. Battleships with anti-submarine equipment and warfare. So, what William Sims does is he says, you know what, we're not going to send these ships over one at a time. We're going to send them over in a convoy, and we're going to protect all these ships with American battleships equipped with anti-submarine warfare. Now, the most common one, and if we watch the movie U-571, you'll see these in action, were depth charges. Depth charges. Anybody know what a depth charge looked like or did that were on battleships? If you suspected there was a submarine in your area by radar, okay, you would drop basically 55-gallon barrels full of explosives off the ship. And what would they do? Sink. And when they got to a certain depth and the pressure hit them, what would they do? Blow up. And they had these depth charges for different depths deciding on where the submarine lied. And they would really raise havoc. They'd get down there close to the submarine, and boom, they'd blow up, and the concussion of the explosion would open up the submarines to leak and all kinds of different things. They weren't necessarily going to blow the submarine to pieces, but it was certainly going to damage the submarine where it would either sink or be forced to surface. And once it surfaces, it's a whole different ballgame. And I'm going to show you this movie, U-571, and it'll kind of explain this whole thing to you. It was more a World War II thing, but it'll make sense. Now, because of the success by Admiral Sims, by July of 1917, the United States had sent 34 ships to Britain full of supplies and food. 34 ships by July of 1917. That's pretty impressive, isn't it? Now, once these troops get trained and ready to go, how are they going to get to Europe to fight? Ships. And so they're going to use the same philosophy, and not one American soldier was killed in the transport from America to Europe during World War I. Not one. So these convoys were very, very effective. So what we're doing is we're trying to get supplies and goods to Great Britain and the Allies to hold off, so they can hold off until what? What? Until we get there, right. Well, as soon after declaring war on Germany, President Wilson had to choose an overall commander of American forces that will fight in World War I, and the man that he picks is a general by the name of John J. Blackjack Pershing. And you'll see his gravestone in Arlington when we go there, when we go to D.C. Take you there and show it to you. So after declaring war on Germany, President Wilson chose General John J. Blackjack Pershing to lead American forces in World War I. And what is the name of the American forces that are going to fight in World War I? Anybody know? The American Expeditionary Force is correct. Now this is where a conflict kind of came up between the Allies and the Americans. Anybody want to guess what that conflict in philosophy might have been? Why, get over here, man. You got to get over here. We need your help. We're barely hanging on. And General Pershing is pretty clear. I'm not sending troops over there that are not trained and prepared. We're not going to do that. So guess what? We're going to help you, but you're going to have to go your own way and get things done till we get there, because I am not sending troops over until they are properly trained. So when did we enter the war? What date? What date we did? Not May. April 6th of 1917. Most of the American troops arrived in March of 1918. So almost took us a year to get them properly trained and get them over there. But Pershing was not going to send them over there unprepared, because he could see a catastrophic problem coming if he did. So although we declared war on April 7th of April 6th of 1917, we didn't send troops until March of 1918. And European leaders were very frustrated with General Pershing. They wanted immediate relief from American soldiers, and he simply wasn't going to give it. Okay? Now, this will be interesting. I just want to explain this before we quit. We're going to talk about President Wilson's 14 points. Anybody ever heard of that? And what it was is something he had in mind for world peace, but he actually gave a speech to Congress before we ever got troops over there, explaining what would happen after the war. He must have been pretty confident that once we got over there, the tide would be turned. And you know what? He was right. Once we got there, it didn't take long to get this thing done. So what he did, and we'll talk about tomorrow, before we ever get troops over there in March of 1918, he addresses Congress, and he tells them about his plan for peace called the 14 points. And we'll explain that to you tomorrow. Okay?